It's time for us to check back in with the family history and stories of Opal Corn Myers. If you've missed any of the previous readings, just look in the description below for a playlist. And you can also buy this wonderful book from me. It's in my Etsy shop, and that link is in the description below too. Teaching at Del Rio. At Del Rio, instead of buying or making my own supplies, they were all furnished by the school. I had big rolls of wide white paper to use all that I wanted or needed. It was easier decorating the classroom too because there was more wall space. We had good lighting, so we didn't have to depend on the windows for our main light source. All the way across one side of the classroom, there were shelves, wide ones like cabinets to put books and supplies in. Above the shelves, there was a bulletin board. I'd cut off long pieces of the white paper from the roll and tack it up on the wall. Then I'd draw pictures of mountain scenes like Mrs. Henderson had taught us to draw at the mission school. We left that background up all year, decorating it for every season and holiday by drawing and cutting things out and sticking them up there. We had paper chickens for Easter, and for Christmas we cut out red and green decorations. We had freedom to do whatever we wanted with our classroom, and the children loved decorating it. They were so proud of how pretty it was and bragged to everyone about it. One year, when I was working with the Head Start program for our final project on animals, we made a huge cow, bigger than life, out of great big heavy cardboard pieces that we glued together, and then the students painted it. They all thought that was so special because they did something that no other class had done. That was for sure the biggest cow anyone had ever seen. I guess that making things to decorate our classroom and field trips were the things they looked forward to most. One of the first assignments I gave my students at Del Rio was to collect as many different kinds of leaves as they could find from the trees around their houses. When the children came with all their leaves, I planned to teach them how to identify them. We would put all of the same kind of leaves together up on the board and then label each group with the name of the tree they came from. Well, after I gave the instructions for their assignment, some of the little girls said, "Don't know where to get us no leaves. Can't you go out in your yard and get some? There ain't no trees round our house." I thought everybody had trees, you know, but I found out, sure enough, they didn't. A lot of them lived in little tenant shacks that a landowner had built out in the middle of a field for some of his workers. That made me so mad. How was it possible that people could live in the country and not have trees or even wildflowers? I could not imagine children not having at least one tree to climb or wildflowers to pick. I thought that was awful. So I started bringing my classes up here to the mission land on field trips and let the children explore the forest surrounding it. Of course, I still took the kids up to Halltop once a year too, usually at the end of the year. After all, children born in the country should know their leaves. The children were always excited about field trips. We would leave the school around 8:30 and come up on a school bus. We would get off close to the spring and walk up here and cover this whole area. I would talk to them about the different types of trees and teach them how to identify them by their leaves and bark and sometimes their shapes. I'd teach them about periwinkle and ferns and other plants. Then while I fixed them a hot lunch, usually hot dogs and a side dish, they would wade in the branch and catch spring minnows and crawfish while running and playing like children should. When it was time to head back, they'd have to name 10 trees before they could start walking back down towards the old 15th. I'd let them think if they couldn't name 10 trees, they'd have to walk down by themselves. Naturally, they all wanted to go together. I'd get down there next to the road in front of the barn where there was no way to sneak around me. They'd show me their leaves and name the trees, and I'd send them on down to wait at the end of the lane at the church until I got there. It was always a good teaching trip, and the children had the best time. Things were a lot different at Del Rio, but I liked it a lot. It was nice to have other teachers who I could hold as dear friends. Consolidation was different and a big adjustment for me too. Sometimes it was really funny. Teaching 8 grades in one room was a much bigger job than teaching 1 grade, but I never had one bit of a problem getting a substitute teacher for my one-room schools up here. I knew my substitutes too, what kind of people they were and how they handled the children. At Del Rio, I never knew who the substitute would be. One time when Acorn was in the hospital, a new teacher came to substitute. At the schools up here, I used to make our ball bats out of a piece of wood. They didn't look like regular baseball bats. They were flat on the end where you hit the ball. They looked kind of like a small oar. I brought my bat to Del Rio so the children could play with it. During class time, I would stand my bat up behind my chair in the classroom so nobody would get it. Well, I guess the substitute thought that was my paddle for spanking the children. So when the children started acting up like they often did with substitutes, she walked over there and picked up my bat and hit it across the table and said, "You move one more time and I'll use it on you." Why, that just nearly scared those children senseless, thinking that she would hit them with a baseball bat. The children didn't move during class, but when it was time for a break, they decided to all go outside by climbing out the windows. Anything to be funny, you know. I guess children have always thought they could get away with things when they had a substitute teacher. Well, I never did have any problems with my students at Del Rio that I couldn't handle, and I never used a paddle or a baseball bat on any of them. I'm sure your family raised you right, Lori, and as you get older and wiser, someday you'll pass those values to your own children. 1959 through 1969. Catherine Marshall. Catherine Marshall first contacted me in 1959. I'm doing research on a book that I'm writing about my mother, Lenora Whitaker, and her experiences as a teacher at Ebenezer Mission back around 1910. My father, Reverend John Ambrose Wood, was the preacher there at that time. She told me how her mother was just a young girl, not yet out of her teens, when she came to work at the mission. It was there that her parents had met and fallen in love. She said that the other characters in the book that was to be called Christy would be fictional or based on the lives of some of the children who attended the mission school and their families. Catherine asked me if I had any old pictures of the chapel house and the school buildings or any information about Ebenezer Mission. Well, of course, I had both. She asked if it would be all right for them to come for a visit. Her parents were getting old, and she wanted them to be able to see the mission site while they were still able to get around. Mama and Papa and us children didn't live up here when Catherine's mother worked at the mission. I had never heard of her either, but I had heard about Reverend Wood being very strict and outspoken about what he felt the people should or shouldn't be doing. If they weren't in church, he would say, "What were you doing?" or "Why didn't you come to church?" The people thought that he was trying to boss them around. I don't remember too much more that the people here said, but I think a lot of them thought he was going to try to stop them from making whiskey and growing tobacco. Some of the people did say that he was the type of preacher who was determined to make everyone become a Christian, but I doubt that Reverend Wood thought he could do that. Everybody knows that you can't make people believe or change if they don't want to. People are going to do what they want, regardless of your intentions to change them. I'm sure that Reverend Wood must have cared about the people and wanted the best for them. A lot of folks up here were just stubborn and set in their ways. They didn't want to think about changing, and a lot of the men thought that religion was only for women and young children. I'm sure my grandmother and my Aunt Flora had to know Lenora. I just never heard them mention anything about her. Writing a book is not all that easy. It took Catherine Marshall 9 years to research and write Christy. She started off by interviewing her mother and father around the table at their house. They told her all they could remember about the mission children and their families. During the summer of 1959, she and her parents came up here to see the mission house for themselves. Lenora and Reverend Wood couldn't believe their eyes. Things had changed so much since they had been here as young mission workers. So many of the people had moved out, and many of their little cabins had fallen down or were covered with kudzu and other vines. The church that she had seen her husband build had been moved to a different location, and even the mission house itself was not the same. It was about 65 years old by then and had aged a lot in the 45, almost 50 years since she had lived here. They both enjoyed coming back to the mission, and at times it was incredibly emotional for them. To be sure, just being here in the place where they had met, worked together, and fallen in love had to bring back a lot of memories. Having them here meant a lot to me too, and made me remember how things were when I was younger. It was people like them who gave the people up here hope. I am who I am today because of the mission workers, people who allowed God to use them, even though it meant sacrifice and hardship, and many times rejection. Most of my life, from the time we moved down there by my grandma and grandpa Corn, and especially after I started school, the mission and mission workers were the most important part of my life. Even after all of them had gone and the mission closed, the work of the mission was my life. I knew how important this little cove must be to the Woods. They were both wonderful people, and I was glad that I had the chance to meet them. Catherine came back and visited with me several more times to get information about the school and the area, and while she was up here, she used the phone book to pick out some of the names for the characters in the book. Another person who helped her with pictures and information about the area was Mary Rubel, the county historian. I also became friends with Catherine's sister, Emma Lynn Hoskins, who lived in North Carolina, not far from Asheville. Catherine always called her Little M, so that's what I've always called her. We started exchanging cards and letters during the time Catherine was doing her research up here. The funniest thing is that her husband helped in the forestry service and sometimes actually came to this area. After we'd been riding for a while, she came out here with her husband so she could meet me in person. I was so surprised. I said, "You can't be Little M," and she said, "I am." I knew she was a good bit younger than Catherine, but she looked even younger than I had thought she would. She promised to return for a second visit someday. Little M's husband has to come to Hot Springs this spring, so maybe she'll come out here with him. Ever since Ben got back from the Army, he experienced sick spells. Sometimes he would be afraid and distant, almost like he wasn't there or that he didn't care what was going on around him. He acted as though he didn't know what he was doing or who was around him. He would withdraw into himself in his own internal world. Something was going on in that mind of his, but I never could figure out what exactly. There were times that I was sure that he didn't know me from anybody else. Even when he first came home, he'd sometimes forget who I was. He didn't know his own wife. He didn't say anything, but I could just tell. Sometimes he was nice to me and affectionate, and sometimes he wasn't. And then at other times he would be normal, just as good as before he went into the service. As the months passed by, I could tell he wasn't happy. In fact, if he had a happy moment during the rest of his life, you couldn't tell it. He was like a different person. It was like a distant relative moving into your home, and you just got used to them being there. You just got used to it. It is really sad and very lonely, but I knew if I wallowed in the situation, I would have shriveled up inside and died. It concerned me about having Catherine and her parents in the house. I had no idea how he would be, how he would act, or what he would say to them. As it turned out, he remained quiet and somewhat withdrawn, but otherwise he did just fine. Ben had some pretty bad times and caused me a lot of hurt, But there were a lot of good things he did too. I always liked to cook, but I just never found the time. Corinne didn't care much about cooking either, and she never did stay around home much. Ben helped me out most days by fixing all the meals, but if he was in one of his bad times and didn't have supper cooking when I got home from school, I'd have to rush to make biscuits, peel potatoes, and cook up a quick meal. Some Sunday afternoons we would bake pies all afternoon so we would have something sweet to eat during the next week, and many times he would handle that all by himself. When the boys were small, they always wanted to be around him when he was cooking and baking. They'd watch, and sometimes he would let them help him. That's how the boys all learned to cook like they do. That's where they got that from their daddy. Ben always believed in everyone working and doing their share, and even though he wasn't ever able to work a regular job, he certainly wasn't lazy. He was good with the children. I didn't have trouble getting away to do things because Ben would take care of the boys, and I knew I didn't have to worry about them. I didn't have to get after them to get ready for anything because he was always there and they knew they had to mind him. At first, very few people knew he was sick, but I could tell that his health was getting worse. I guess some people just thought that he was too lazy to work. A lot of the teachers in Del Rio thought I had such a bad life having to put up with the things that he did and earn all the money for us to live on. One time, I finally came out and told some of them, "Well, I thank the Lord that I do have a husband, even though he is sick." They said I was crazy, but I told them, "No, I'm not. He may not be able to hold down a paying job, but you know it means a lot to me having him there to help with the children and chores." That was true too. Think about it. I had to get up at 4 in the morning to get ready for school. It took a long time to get to the school in Del Rio because the roads were so bad. Why, up here on this end, our road was no more than a bad trail, and the rest of the way to the old 15th, the road was nothing more than ruts and washouts. Old 15th wasn't much better, but the county did scrape it on occasion. Ben would get the boys up after I had left and help them get ready for school. He saw to it that they were fed and had their hair combed, and when they were small, he would walk them down to catch the bus. The teachers at Del Rio realized just how sick he was when I started missing a lot of work to take Ben to the doctors. They were genuinely concerned about me with all the extra work I had to do to keep up with things. Before too long, just about everyone figured out that Ben was getting sicker, especially when they found out he had been in the hospital. We'll stop right there for today. Another interesting peek into Opal's life, and the beginning of the book explained how Catherine Marshall played a role really in this, so now we're back to where Catherine Marshall calls her, or writes her and says she wants to come talk to her. And if you don't know who Catherine Marshall is, she wrote the book Christy. Maybe you've seen the TV show, maybe you've read the book. It's a wonderful book. And that's what this Christy was based on, this mission that this whole book about Opal's been talking about, the Ebenezer mission. That's where Christy was based on that, because Catherine Marshall's parents had been there, like Opal just explained. And really, the book led us to be able to know about Christy, that book, because once Barbara League, the author of this wonderful book about Opal, read Christy, then she decided she wanted, her and her husband said, we can probably figure out where that is, even though Catherine Marshall did change the names. And it's so interesting, Opal says she used the phone book to get some of the characters' names out of, which I really love that. I love that, I understand why she changed the names, but I love that she went back to the place it was and got the pool of names in that area in the phone book. We don't even have phone books today, but in that area, and found and picked out the names, so I love that. Anyway, Christy led Barbara and her husband to find Opal, they just wanted to see the mission too, and then they ended up meeting Opal and fell in love with her and become lifelong friends, and went back to visit her all the time, and just become like family to each other. And then that's why Opal asked Barbara to write this wonderful, wonderful book. So it's kind of coming full circle, the book is. It started out with the why behind Barbara writing it, and now here we hear that Catherine Marshall has contacted Opal so that she could ask her about the book. Now she talks about Del Rio, about once she's there. If you remember last week, she was talking about how it wasn't that she was against consolidation of schools, but she was just worried about the students who had never, they were going to see people, like the people was probably going to be dressed better than them. They'd never used an indoor bathroom. They didn't know about the lunchroom food that they were serving. It might be something different. They had to pay. They had to ride a long bus, bus ride, all those things she was worried about. But now, this part's Opal saying, well, there was good things about it for her. It was hard, but there was good things. And definitely I think, overall point Opal's making is that it was kind of the land of plenty compared to what she had come from. She had plenty of materials to work with. She didn't have to worry about getting books for the children. There was plenty of books. There was even plenty of things to decorate, but there was even plenty of light. She had light. She didn't have to worry about the sun coming in the windows to provide their light. So even though things were hard for her too, she says, to adjust, there was pluses of being in a school that was funded by the county and provided for in that way. Now, you could certainly say, I'll say it, nobody else doesn't have to, the county should have provided for those small schools the same way they provided for the bigger school, but that just was not how it was and wasn't how it happened in those days. I love how she talks about that she made the bulletin board across the wall with that big paper. She had endless paper now. Remember, before she used paper out of pantyhose packaging and all scraps of paper she could find. Anyway, she made the big bulletin board, and then she drew mountains, and then they decorated the mountains depending on the season. I love that. I love the creativity of it. I love that Opal used the mountains. She was kind of saying in the mountains in the spring, and there's baby chicks, and talking about Easter. I'm sure she talked about the reason for Easter too, the religious meaning of it. And then also, Christmas, you can imagine that she probably put colored leaves on it in the fall. So I really, really love that. And I wish I could have seen it. And then the big cow, that they made the big cow, and her class was so proud of it because nobody else had ever done that, and they made it out of cardboard. And she says there's never been a cow that big. I wonder how big it was, like if it was the whole wall, if it was even bigger than that. I imagine they said it was cardboard, so I don't know if they put it on the wall or if it was like a freestanding thing, but I love that. I'd like to have seen that too. And then she decides she's going to teach them. Opal is so wonderful. She wants them to learn to read and excel and learn all the things they need to do to go off to college so then they can better themselves and their families. But she also wants to teach them about the mountains that they live in. So she's going to teach them about the trees and the leaves. And then she finds out some of them don't have trees there in their yards where they live, and so she decides she's going to take them up to her house, take them on that field trip, and she'll teach them about them that way. I really, really love that. And when I was in, how you wish sometimes that you had, or maybe you're not like this, but I am, there's a couple of things that I wish that I had not let go, that I had not lost somewhere along the way. And actually 2 of them come from high school. One of them is I had a biology teacher, Mrs. Meadows. I loved her. I was her assistant one year, but during my regular class with her, I don't remember if it's biology or just basic science, but whichever one it was, that's what she gave us, an assignment like that. We had to go out into the woods, and we used photo albums, to put the leaves, press the leaves in, write down the names of them. If we didn't know, she would help us. I didn't need her help though, because I had Pap. I remember me and Pap stogging around through the woods up this ridge down here above Granny's especially. It's kind of this whole ridge that just goes continuously on down behind our house and on down behind Granny's. We went all over that, and he helped me, and I put them in my book and wrote the names, and I don't know I have no clue what happened to that book. I'm sure I wouldn't have just threw it away, but I probably kept it for a long time and then somehow lost it, or I don't know. Maybe the leaves started falling apart. I don't know. I wish I still had it though. But I'm glad Miss Meadows made me do that. Now, I couldn't go and tell you whatever tree is like Opal's telling, but I could tell some of them. I could tell quite a few of them, I guess. Anyway, I love that. And the kids, the little girls saying that they didn't have a tree in their yard. Like me, my goodness, I can't even count the trees around me. And I've been blessed to grow up in a place that's like that, so it's hard for me to imagine living a place where there's no trees. Now, I know some people do, and they love it, like thinking about the plains. You know, when Katie went on her trip out west a few years ago, that was something she thought was so strange, was that there was no trees. Just as far as she could see, there was no trees. So I know some people, that's their natural, you know, habitat, and that's what they appreciate. But it reminded me, though, those little girls saying, there ain't no trees, I ain't got no trees. One time when Corey and Katie was in college, a young girl that was their age, you know, one of their college classmates, she come home with them one time for the weekend or something like that. And she just went out in our yard and walked around, and she just almost cried because she had never seen a garden before. And she walked through our garden and just oohed and awed over like the winter squash and the okra and the plants that were still producing. She just was like, I mean, it was almost like, I don't know, I can't even describe the look on her face. She was so surprised, pleased, in awe, because she was standing in a garden and she had never even seen one. And she was a young girl that really wanted to be healthy, so she tried to eat vegetables and, you know, eat very healthy and all that kind of stuff. But she'd never seen where the food come from. So I will never forget the look on her face. It was really, really something. And maybe those little girls had that same look when Opal took them on their first field trip up there. I like the part where she's talking about Catherine Marshall and kind of the missionaries and the people, not just Catherine Marshall's parents, but the other missionaries, the ones that Opal had been influenced by, that come there to the mission, all the different people over the years, and she's just thinking about them previous to her, and then, you know, during her lifetime too. But I loved, she said, they all allowed God to use them, even though it meant sacrifice and hardship and many times rejection. I think sometimes, I know I do, I get it in my mind like, well, if I just do what God wants me to do as a believer, it'll just all be sunshine and roses. It's not, that's just not it. He doesn't promise that. He wants us to have radical obedience to do what we should do. But a lot of times that radical obedience, I'm doing exactly what the good Lord wants me to do, may end in complete disaster, because as Opal said, we can't control what other people do. We can't. We can do what we're supposed to do, but we can't control what they do. But like she said, rejection. Now, a lot of those mountain people did reject him, and it was because they didn't understand, because they thought they were trying to tell them what to do, because they couldn't let go of maybe some of their old wives' tales and things like that. But then a whole lot of people like Opal's family and many, many more embraced them, and their children learned, and, you know, they learned, I think, about the good Lord from them, but also about hygiene and importance of, and just the pleasure of being able to read, you know, just the pleasure of that. If you never did anything, you're thinking about employment-wise or monetarily wise, if you could just read, what a pleasure that would be, to be able to read and find your way and find out about anything you wanted to. So there was many, many people who did embrace them, but I really loved how Opal said that. It's so true, so true. And then, you know, we get to hear a little bit more about Ben there at the end, about his sickness that he come back from the service with, and I guess something, like we said before, in his brain just broke. It was just too much trauma, seeing the men there blow up on the airplane. We read that part of the book, and it was just too much. It was just too much for him. And so maybe it was a way of protection, that his brain would just go back to a different place. And she said it was like he didn't know them. Maybe it just hurt too bad to remember, and sometimes he felt like he really didn't know them. But she tells us in this part that he's getting worse. But I love when she says the teachers at school, you know, kind of, I guess, are thinking, well, he's just lazy and you got to do all the work and he don't even support you. And she tells them, you know, I'm thankful for him. He may not be able to work, but he does all this other stuff for me. And I'm thankful to the Lord that I have a husband, and, you know, he helps me with the kids, and he does a lot of the cooking and just all the things. Of course, Opal was thankful for him because she loved him. She didn't know, and he didn't either, when he went off to service, that he was going to come back a broken man, you know. So she loved him. But I love that whole part of Opal telling him, kind of getting enough and saying, now listen, I'm thankful for him. He can still help me. And yeah, he's sick, but I thank the Lord for my husband. Thankful that I've got him. All that, though, and her focusing really on like how he would cook, how he would get the kids up and get them ready. She never had to worry about that. That really makes me think, I mean, I guess it kind of sums Opal up, like and a lot of the mountain people, I would say, making do and being grateful for the little things. That's it in a nutshell. That's Opal. Like, she works so hard to help other people, but then there's some stuff that she just says that's just life. That's just how it is. We just have to make do and do the best we can. And I've always said I think there's for me, a comfort in that. Now, I always want things to get better if it's a bad situation. But sometimes, if it's something that can't get better, the comfort comes from when you actually, like, so often us humans, it's something that we really, maybe it's a relationship or a problem like Ben, we just keep trying and trying and trying and trying to fix it this way and fix it that way and fix it that way. Sometimes there's a relief in knowing it's unfixable. It can't be fixed. So I've got to move, I've got to pivot, and I've got to just do what the good Lord wants me to do, take care of the things I can take care of, and be grateful for the little pieces here and there about that thing that cannot be changed. It's out of my hands, you know. And of course, pray that it could be, pray that it would be fixed. But you finally get to a point where you realize you personally can't fix it. You can't do it. So I've always said there's kind of a a comfort for me in that, of kindly knowing, like, that's, I don't know, I think of it like boundaries. Like, I know that wall's not moving, so then I just need to continue to do the best things I can do, but be grateful for the little pieces around that thing that won't move, and pray about it and let God handle it, you know. There's a comfort in that. So I hope you enjoyed this part of the book. It's kind of sad because we're getting closer and closer to the end, but we've got a little bit left. So I hope you'll leave a comment and let me know what jumped out at you today, what you liked about this part, and I hope you'll drop back by next Friday and we'll see what Opal talks about next.